The barking from the dogs ceased first, on the morning of October 7, 1863. 3 bloodhounds, bred to pursue runaways through the swamps of the Yazoo Basin, refused to step across the boundary of the Thornton plantation in Warren County, Mississippi. Their handler, a man named Silas Creed, who'd spent 11 years tracking fugitives, watched his animals whimper and cower, pressing their stomachs flat against the mud. Something lurking in the cypress shadows had claimed territory these beasts instinctively understood as forbidden. By nightfall, Creed would be dead, his corpse discovered drifting face down in the dark waters, rope burns circling his ankles, pointing to him having been dragged. Nobody could account for the pattern of puncture wounds running down his spine, but the enslaved people laboring in the cotton fields 2 miles to the east knew exactly what had occurred. They possessed a name for the entity that traveled through those wetlands, a name whispered only after the overseers had turned in for the night. They called him Black Mamba, and he was merely beginning. The slave ship Elizabeth made port in New Orleans on March 14, 1859, transporting 207 human beings shackled within its hull. Among them was a young man from the Ashanti region, roughly 17 years old, who would never speak his birth name to any white person who claimed ownership over him. The ship's manifest listed him only as male, healthy, warrior marks. Those marks, ritual scarification across his shoulders and chest, told a narrative the slavers couldn't decipher. He'd served as a scout for his village, trained from childhood to glide silently through thick forest, to interpret tracks, to set snares for leopards and enemy raiders. When European slavers descended on his village at daybreak, burning huts and chaining survivors, he'd fought until a rifle butt fractured his skull. He regained consciousness in darkness, in chains, in the Elizabeth's hold. The Middle Passage lasted 63 days. 41 individuals perished before landfall. The young Ashanti warrior absorbed something during those 63 days that would shape everything that followed. He realized that silence meant survival. That observation was strategy, that the instant you stopped calculating was the moment you surrendered. He studied the sailors' routines. He committed to memory which planks groaned the loudest, which hatches opened with ease, which crew members displayed hesitation when handing out the meager rations. He stored every piece of information in a mind that would later prove capable of retaining maps, patrol schedules, and the exact timing of a cottonmouth strike. At the New Orleans slave market on Barron Street, a Mississippi planter named Robert Thornton bought him for $800. Thornton owned 700 acres of cotton along the Big Black River. Worked by 93 enslaved people, he required strong backs for the harvest season. The Ashanti warrior was renamed Jake, a simple, forgettable name, and transported upriver in chains to Warren County. The journey took 4 days. Jake didn't utter a single word. He observed the landscape drift past, noting the river's bends, the thickness of the cypress groves, the spots where the current ran swift, and where it pooled into still eddies, ideal for concealment. The overseer at Thornton Plantation was a North Carolina man named Virgil Cass, 38 years old, renowned for efficiency and cruelty in equal portions. Cass delivered the same speech to each new slave, delivered while pacing before the gathered field hands. You got 3 rules here. Work hard. Don't run. Don't cause trouble. Break a rule, you get the lash. Break 2 rules, you get sold down the river. Break 3 rules, you die. He halted in front of Jake, examining the ritual scars. You look like you might be trouble. Prove me wrong. Jake looked past him, his expression blank, revealing nothing. The cotton fields of Warren County stretched in rows, so straight they seemed to converge at infinity. The labor was punishing, stooping from dawn until dusk, fingers bleeding from the sharp bowls, backs screaming from the endless bending. Jake labored without complaint, moved efficiently, spoke infrequently. The other enslaved workers noticed his stillness, the way he seemed to occupy space without claiming it. A woman named Esther, who'd been born on the plantation and served as an informal leader among the field hands, observed him carefully. "You understand English?" she asked one evening after the work bell rang. "Yes, ma'am," Jake said quietly. "Where are you from?" "Across the water." "You got people?" "Not anymore." Esther nodded. Everyone here had lost someone. She didn't press further, but she took note of how Jake watched everything. The guard's rotation, the sun's position, the way the wind shifted before rain. This was someone who was perpetually planning, even if he didn't yet know what he was planning for. The incident with the cottonmouth occurred on a Saturday in late June 1859. The field hands were clearing brush near the river when someone screamed. A cottonmouth, thick as a man's forearm and nearly 4 feet long, had emerged from the undergrowth and struck at a young boy named Samuel. The snake missed, but only barely, and now coiled in the open dirt, mouth gaping wide, white tissue visible, body quivering with menace. The workers scattered. Cass raised his rifle, but Jake moved faster, stepping forward in one fluid motion, catching the snake behind the head with his left hand, while his right hand seized the tail. The cottonmouth thrashed violently, but Jake held firm. He squeezed. There was a wet crack as vertebrae separated. The snake went limp. Jake dropped it in the dirt and returned to work without a word. Esther found him that evening near the slave quarters. "Where'd you learn that?" "Different snakes where I'm from. Same principle. Most men would have run." Jake looked at her directly for the first time. "Running only works if you know where you're going." The story spread through the quarters that night, growing with each retelling. By the following morning, the younger field hands had started calling him Mamba, the name of a snake from Africa they'd heard about in stories passed down through generations. The Black Mamba moved faster than a man could think, struck without warning, and its bite meant death. The name fit. Jake didn't discourage it. A reputation could be useful if wielded carefully, but the name also drew attention from the Thorntons. Robert Thornton's eldest son, Marcus, 24 years old, educated in law at the University of Virginia and utterly bored with plantation management, heard the story from Cass. The African killed the snake with his bare hands. That's what the field hands say. Marcus smiled slowly. He'd been looking for entertainment. Marcus Thornton had learned to ride and shoot before he could read. He'd hunted deer, boar, and bear across 3 states. But animals were predictable, territory-bound, limited by instinct. A man, though, a man who'd been trained as a warrior, who'd killed a cottonmouth without flinching. That would be sport worthy of the name. He proposed the idea to his father over dinner in August of 1859. A hunting game. Give the African a head start into the swamp. Track him on horseback with dogs. When caught, bring him back. No harm done, just exercise. Robert Thornton frowned. You're proposing to chase my property through dangerous territory for amusement. I'm proposing to train him. A slave who knows he can't escape is a slave who won't try. Besides, we'll have Cass and 4 armed men. The African won't even make it a mile. Robert considered this. His son's restlessness had been a problem lately. Better to channel it into something controlled than let it fester into gambling or dueling. No injuries. I need him for the harvest. Marcus grinned. Of course. The first hunt took place on a Sunday afternoon in late August. Jake was brought to the edge of the property, where cultivated land met swamp. Marcus explained the rules from horseback, rifle resting across his saddle. You run, we count to 100, then we come after you. If you make it to the old Sinclair place, he pointed northwest where ruins of an abandoned plantation were barely visible through the trees. "You win. We let you rest tomorrow. If we catch you, you work double tomorrow. Understand?" Jake looked at the swamp, then back at Marcus. His expression revealed nothing. "Yes, sir." "Good. Start running." Jake didn't run. He walked deliberately into the cypress shadows. Marcus laughed and began counting aloud. At 100, he signaled the dogs. They lunged forward, baying. The hunters followed at a canter, confident in their superiority of numbers, weapons, and local knowledge. They found Jake's trail easily enough. Broken branches, disturbed mud, boot prints heading northwest. But after a quarter mile, the trail split, then split again. The dogs became confused, circling back on themselves. Cass dismounted to examine the tracks more carefully. "He's doubling back, laying false paths. Then follow the real path." Marcus snapped. "That's the problem. They all look real." They found Jake 2 hours later sitting calmly on a fallen log near the Sinclair ruins. He'd beaten them to the finish line and waited. Marcus, sweating and irritated, stared down from his horse. "How?" "I ran fast, sir," Jake said, which was a lie. He'd mapped the terrain weeks before during supervised timber, cutting expeditions, memorized the quickest route, and laid the false trails in minutes using a technique his people had used to confuse leopards. But there was no reason to explain tactical thinking to a man who saw him as property. Marcus rode away angry, but he would be back. The hunt had been too interesting to abandon after one attempt. The hunts became weekly events. Between August of 1859 and April of 1860, Marcus Thornton organized 19 hunts. Each time, Jake was given a head start, and each time he used the opportunity not to escape, but to map. The Yazoo Basin swamps covered hundreds of square miles, a maze of black water, cypress knees, and shifting channels that could drown a man who didn't know the solid paths. Jake turned himself into a living map. He identified high ground that stayed dry during floods, hollow trees that could hide supplies, channels deep enough to move silently by night. He marked landmarks that would be invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. A lightning, scarred oak, a cluster of river cane, a sandbar shaped like a crescent moon. The other enslaved people noticed his Sunday returns. He always came back wet, scratched, exhausted. Easter began leaving food for him: cornbread wrapped in cloth, dried meat, a clay jug of water. She never asked questions. Some knowledge was safer unspoken. But one evening after the 16th hunt, she found him sitting outside the quarters, methodically cleaning mud from his boots. "You learning something out there?" "Yes, ma'am." "You planning to use it?" "Not yet." "Why not?" Jake glanced toward the main house where lamplight glowed in the windows. "Because running by yourself just means you die alone. Better to wait until running means something." Esther understood. A single escape was a personal victory. An organized resistance was a revolution. But revolutions required preparation, and preparation required time. During this period, Jake began to change how the other enslaved people saw him. He taught a few trusted individuals basic tracking skills: how to read disturbed earth, how to move without snapping branches, how to erase footprints by dragging pine branches behind. He never framed it as preparation for escape. Instead, he taught it as hunting technique, as if they were simply improving their ability to trap rabbits for supplemental food. The overseers, if they noticed at all, saw only slaves making their meals more varied. They didn't see a tactical curriculum building. Jake also studied the plantation's social structure with the same attention he gave to the swamp. He learned which field hands could be trusted, which were desperate enough to inform for extra rations, which had family bonds that made them vulnerable to coercion. He memorized guard rotations, supply deliveries, the rhythm of Robert Thornton's trips to Vicksburg for business. He noted that Cass drank heavily on Saturday nights and was sluggish on Sunday mornings. He observed that the plantation stored its gunpowder in a shed near the stables, secured only by a simple lock. Every detail was cataloged, stored, waiting for the moment it would matter. The plantation's white community, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. Robert Thornton saw only a well-behaved slave who worked diligently and never caused trouble. Marcus saw a challenging quarry who made his Sunday hunts entertaining. The overseer saw another African who'd learned his place. Even the neighboring planters, when they heard about Marcus's hunting games, found them amusing rather than concerning. Young Thornton's got himself a clever runner, they'd say, over whiskey in Vicksburg parlors. Keeps him occupied, I suppose. What would you do if you were a neighbor who heard these stories? Would you see sport, or would you see a man being systematically trained in survival by the very people who owned him? The first patrol dog disappeared in November of 1859. The dog, a mixed-breed tracking hound named Brutus, belonged to a local patrol that enforced slave codes across Warren County. The patrol, 5 white men authorized by the state to search for runaways and enforce curfews, used Brutus to intimidate field hands during their sweeps. The dog was vicious, trained to bite on command, a weapon with teeth. One Wednesday evening, Brutus vanished while the patrol was checking passes near the Big Black River. His handler searched for 2 hours before finding the body floating in shallow water. Neck broken cleanly, no sign of struggle. The patrol blamed a bear. Bears occasionally wandered up from Louisiana, and a big male could certainly kill a dog. But Esther, hearing the story from a house slave who'd overheard the patrol's report, looked at Jake and said nothing. He was mending a harness, fingers working the leather, expression distant. He didn't confirm anything. He didn't need to. The second patrol dog disappeared in January of 1860. This time, the body was found on dry land, arranged carefully at the base of a cypress tree, surrounded by a pattern of broken sticks that looked almost intentional. The patrol began to grow uneasy. 2 dogs in 2 months was unusual. The handlers started traveling in pairs, keeping their animals leashed even in open country. The third dog disappeared in March. This time, witnesses reported seeing something moving through the trees near where the patrol was working. A shadow that moved like water, there and gone before anyone could focus. The patrol gave chase, but found nothing except tracks that led into the swamp and vanished at the water's edge. The dog's body was never recovered. Rumors began spreading among the white population of Warren County. Some said a panther had moved into the territory. Others whispered about something else, a swamp spirit, a conjure trick, a vengeful ghost. The enslaved population said nothing publicly, but privately they knew. Black Mamba was teaching the patrol to fear. Jake had spent months studying the patrol routes, learning which paths they favored, which times they were most active. The dogs were the patrol's primary weapon. Remove them, and the patrols became far less effective. He set snares in locations the dogs would investigate, used baits scented to lure them away from their handlers, and killed them quickly, efficiently, with the same calm he'd used on the cottonmouth. Each death was calculated to increase the patrol's anxiety, while leaving no clear evidence of human involvement. Let them think it was an animal. Let them think it was supernatural. Fear worked best when its source remained unclear. By April of 1860, the Warren County Patrol had lost 5 dogs in 6 months. They stopped bringing animals on their sweeps. This meant they had to rely entirely on visual tracking, which was far less reliable in dense vegetation. Runaways from surrounding plantations began to notice that the patrol's effectiveness had declined. A few more people attempted flight. Most were recaptured, but the attempts became more frequent. The system was developing cracks. Marcus Thornton, hearing about the patrol dog incidents, mentioned them during one of the Sunday hunts. Cass thinks something's killing patrol dogs in the swamp. Says it might be a big cat. He looked at Jake, who was standing at the designated starting point, waiting for the count to begin. "You seen anything unusual out there?" "No, sir," Jake said. "Just trees and water." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Well, if you do see a panther, try not to wrestle it. I'd hate to lose my best runner." "Yes, sir." The count began. Jake disappeared into the swamp. Marcus never suspected that his favorite entertainment was also training the most dangerous man in Warren County. Wesley Creed made his living returning runaway slaves to their owners. He'd been in the business for 16 years, working territories from Virginia to Louisiana, and he was good at his job. Methodical, patient, utterly indifferent to the suffering his work caused. He charged by the mile, 20 cents for every mile traveled to retrieve a fugitive, plus expenses. In a good year, he could earn $800, which was more than most small farmers made. When he arrived in Warren County in June of 1860, responding to a contract from a planter in Claiborne County who'd lost 3 slaves to the swamps, Creed brought with him a reputation for never losing a trail and a set of tools that included manacles, leg irons, and a leather whip braided with wire. He also brought his brother Silas, younger, less experienced, but learning the trade. The Creed brothers set up camp on the western edge of the Thornon plantation, where the swamp began, and started their work. They interviewed locals, studied reports of sightings, and began tracking through the dense vegetation. They found signs, disturbed earth, broken branches, evidence that someone had been moving through the area regularly. Silas thought it might be multiple fugitives, using the same paths. Wesley, more experienced, suspected a single individual who knew the terrain intimately. "This isn't random wandering," he told his brother. "This is someone who's mapped the whole region." What the Creeds didn't know was that Jake had been watching them since their arrival. He'd spotted their camp on the first day, observed their tracking methods, noted their routines. He recognized them for what they were immediately: professionals who posed a genuine threat to any escape network. They needed to be discouraged, and discouragement required a message they couldn't ignore. Jake waited until the Creeds split up to cover more ground. Wesley went north along a promising trail. Silas went south, paralleling a creek. Jake followed Silas, moving silently through the undergrowth, staying downwind. Silas was younger, less cautious. He whistled while he walked, confident in his safety. That confidence died when Jake stepped out of the vegetation 20 yards behind him, deliberately making noise. Silas spun, hand going to the pistol at his belt. "Who's there?" Jake stood perfectly still, watching. He didn't speak. He simply held Silas's gaze, letting the younger man see him fully. The ritual scars, the absolute calm, the complete absence of fear. It was a calculated choice. Silas could shoot, but a gunshot would bring his brother running, and Jake would vanish before Wesley arrived. Or Silas could back away, report what he'd seen, and plant seeds of doubt. Silas backed away. He kept his pistol drawn, moving carefully, never taking his eyes off Jake until the undergrowth hid him. Then he ran. He found his brother an hour later and described the encounter, voice shaking. "He just stood there, didn't say a word, like he was waiting for me to do something stupid." Wesley frowned. "You're sure he wasn't armed?" "Positive. But that didn't matter. He didn't need to be. You should have seen his eyes." That night, Jake visited their camp. The Creeds had built a fire and were eating salt pork and cornbread. Jake crept within 30 feet, close enough to hear their conversation, close enough to be deliberately obvious if they had any woodcraft skill. He wanted them to feel watched. He wanted them to understand they were prey now, not hunters. Then he withdrew, leaving a single sign. A broken branch stuck upright in the ground, outside the ring of firelight, positioned so they'd see it in the morning. Wesley found it at dawn. He examined it carefully, noted the clean break, the precise placement. His playing games.
Who is?
Whoever's out here, and he's good. Wesley looked at the swamp, at the dark water and the endless trees. We're pulling out. The contract's not worth it. We're leaving because of one man. We're leaving because one man knows these swamps better than we do, and staying means dying. I've been in this business long enough to know when I'm outmatched. The Creeds packed their camp and left Warren County that afternoon. Word spread quickly among the slave-catching community. The Yazoo Basin swamps were off limits. Something dangerous lived there. Some said it was a spirit. Others said it was a man who'd learned to move like smoke. But everyone agreed the risk wasn't worth the reward. By the summer of 1860, stories about Black Mamba had spread beyond Warren County. Enslaved people across western Mississippi whispered the name with a mixture of hope and awe. He'd killed patrol dogs. He'd driven off the Creed brothers. He'd outrun Marcus Thornton's hunts 19 times. Each story grew in the telling, blending fact with folklore until it became difficult to distinguish one from the other. Some said he could turn invisible. Others said he spoke to snakes and they obeyed him. A few claimed he'd made a deal with the spirits of the swamp, trading his voice for protection. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. Jake had spent 18 months learning the terrain so thoroughly that he'd become part of it. But legends required maintenance. Jake understood that the fear his reputation generated was useful only if reinforced periodically. So he began leaving signs, deliberate markers that suggested supernatural presence, while actually serving practical purposes. He carved symbols into trees near frequently used patrol routes, symbols that looked like African religious iconography, but actually indicated safe water sources and hidden supply caches. He arranged bones from animals in patterns that seemed ritualistic but actually pointed toward escape routes. He created the appearance of a swamp spirit while building infrastructure for resistance. The white population's reaction was predictable. Some dismissed the stories as slave superstition. Others grew genuinely concerned. The Warren County newspaper, the Vicksburg Whig, ran an article in July of 1860 titled, "Swamp Disturbances and Negro Unrest." The article acknowledged that patrol effectiveness had declined due to animal predation on tracking dogs and suggested increased vigilance regarding communication between plantations. The article never mentioned Black Mamba by name. That would have granted too much credibility to slave folklore. But the subtext was clear. Something in the swamps was making the enslaved population bolder. Robert Thornton called a meeting of local planters in August. 23 men gathered in the Thornton plantation's main house, drinking imported whiskey and discussing the problem. Most still believed the solution was simple violence. Increase patrols, impose stricter curfews, make examples of anyone caught communicating between plantations. A few, including a planter named Harrison Bell, who owned property adjacent to the swamps, took the threat more seriously. If there's one man coordinating resistance through that swamp, we need to find him and make sure he doesn't become a symbol. Symbols spread. Marcus Thornton, who'd been quiet through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "I know who it is." The room went silent. "Explain," his father said. "My runner Jake, the one I've been hunting on Sundays. He knows those swamps better than anyone. He's strong, smart, and patient, everything the stories describe." "Then we sell him," someone suggested. "Get him off your property." "Selling him just moves the problem," Marcus said. "And besides, We have no proof. He's never caused trouble on the plantation, never missed a day's work. If we accuse him without evidence and we're wrong, we look like fools spooked by slave tales. Then what do you suggest? Robert asked. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. We stop playing games. Next Sunday, the hunt becomes real. We push him hard, cut off every route he knows, force him to improvise. When he makes a mistake, and he will, we'll know for certain if he's behind this. And if he is, we'll handle it permanently. The plan was agreed upon. The hunt scheduled for August 19th, 1860, would be different from all the others. This time, Marcus would bring 10 armed men, twice the usual number. They'd start before dawn to maximize daylight, and they'd push Jake to exhaustion, drive him until his legendary skill became a liability. Somewhere in the swamp, under pressure, the man would reveal whether he was truly behind the legend. What the planters didn't know was that Jake had been expecting this escalation. You couldn't build a reputation without eventually drawing serious attention. He'd prepared for this moment since his first hunt, and when it came, he'd be ready. The storm was coming. August 19th, 1860, began with heavy fog rolling off the river. Visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. Marcus Thornton assembled his hunting party before dawn. 10 men on horseback, all armed with rifles, plus Cass on foot with a pack of supplies. They brought no dogs. The dogs were gone. Jake was roused from the quarters at 4:30 in the morning and walked to the edge of the swamp by lantern light. Marcus explained the new rules from horseback, voice flat. Today's different. We've got all day. We've got 10 men. You run, and we run you to ground. No finish line. No safety. You survive until sunset, you've earned a rest. Otherwise, you answer some questions we've been meaning to ask. Understand? Jake looked at the assembled men, at the rifles, at Marcus's cold expression. He understood perfectly. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a test, and failing meant death.
Yes, sir.
Then go. Jake walked into the fog. Behind him, Marcus waited exactly 60 seconds before signaling the pursuit. The hunt began. For the first hour, Jake followed his standard pattern, moving northwest toward the Sinclair ruins, laying false trails, doubling back to confuse pursuit. But the fog complicated everything. He couldn't see more than 40 feet in any direction, which meant navigation had to rely entirely on memorized landmarks. A burned stump here, a distinctive cypress there, the sound of water moving in a particular channel. He moved with absolute confidence, trusting his mental map, while behind him, he could hear the hunters calling to each other through the fog, trying to coordinate. By hour 2, the fog began to lift. Jake used the increased visibility to assess his situation. The hunters had split into 3 groups, one pushing straight ahead, 2 flanking left and right. They were trying to box him in, force him toward the river where escape routes narrowed. Jake adjusted his path, angling south instead of northwest, moving toward terrain that was more difficult. Thicker vegetation, deeper water, channels that required wading chest deep. The hunters wouldn't expect him to choose discomfort over speed. By hour 3, Jake reached a section of the swamp he'd prepared months earlier. He'd cached supplies here. A clay jug of drinking water sealed with wax, dried venison wrapped in oilcloth, and a knife stolen from the plantation's blacksmith shop and hidden in a hollow tree. He retrieved the supplies, drank deeply, ate quickly, and continued moving. The knife went into his belt, just having it changed the psychological dynamic. He was no longer entirely defenseless. Behind him, the hunters were struggling. The water was deeper than expected, the undergrowth denser, the heat oppressive. 2 men had already turned back, exhausted. Marcus pushed the remaining 8 forward with grim determination. He's out here somewhere. He has to stop eventually. But Jake didn't stop. He used techniques he'd learned in Africa: breathing controlled, pace steady, never pushing to full sprint, but maintaining a rhythm that covered ground efficiently. He waded through channels that soaked him to the neck, pulled himself over fallen logs, pushed through tangles of river cane. By hour 5, he'd opened up significant distance between himself and pursuit. Then, deliberately, he stopped running. Jake found a position on high ground, overlooking a narrow channel the hunters would have to cross. He concealed himself behind a massive cypress tree, perfectly still, and waited. Marcus and 5 others arrived 20 minutes later. They paused at the channel's edge, assessing the crossing. The water was dark, surface reflecting the canopy above, depth uncertain. Cass tested it with a long stick. 4 feet, maybe 5. We can wait it. Marcus nodded. Single file. Watch for drop-offs. They entered the water. Jake waited until all 6 men were committed. Halfway across, rifles held overhead to keep them dry, attention focused on footing. Then he moved. He came down from the high ground, silently, circling wide, and reached the point where the hunters had left their horses. The animals were tied loosely to trees, nervous in the oppressive heat. Jake cut the lead ropes with his stolen knife. The horses, sensing freedom, bolted immediately, crashing through undergrowth, splashing across shallow water, disappearing into the swamp. The hunters heard the commotion. Marcus shouted orders, but by the time they'd struggled back across the channel, the horses were gone. Cass stared at the cut ropes, comprehension dawning. He circled behind us. Then he's playing a different game now, Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. We continue on foot. Spread out. He can't evade all of us. But Jake wasn't evading. He was demonstrating. For the next 3 hours, he led the hunters on a deliberate route, showing them how thoroughly he controlled this environment. He left obvious tracks that led to dead ends. He made sounds in the distance that drew them in wrong directions. He used the terrain to exhaust them, choosing paths through the deepest water, the thickest vegetation, the most treacherous footing. By mid-afternoon, 2 more hunters had given up, stumbling back toward the plantation. Marcus, Cass, and 3 others continued grimly forward. At hour 9, Jake decided the demonstration was complete. He needed to end this decisively, established beyond doubt that pursuing him in the swamps was suicide. He'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Near a place where 2 channels converged, he'd spent weeks constructing a trap. A weighted net made from vines concealed in the cypress branches, triggered by a tripwire. He led the hunters directly to it. Cass triggered the wire. The net dropped, entangling him and 1 other hunter in heavy cordage weighted with rocks. They went down hard, shouting, struggling. Marcus spun, rifle coming up. But Jake was already gone, vanished into the undergrowth like smoke. The remaining 3 hunters spent 20 minutes cutting their companions free. When they finally extracted Cass from the net, he was bleeding from a dozen scratches, furious and done. I'm not dying in this swamp for your pride, he told Marcus. We're leaving now. Marcus wanted to argue, but he looked at his remaining men and saw exhaustion and fear. They'd been hunting for 10 hours. They were soaked, scratched, hungry, and lost. Their horses were gone. Night would fall in a few hours, and none of them wanted to be in this swamp after dark. Fine, Marcus said, but this isn't over. They limped back to the plantation, arriving just before sunset. Jake was already there, sitting outside the slave quarters, eating cornbread Esther had saved for him. He looked up as Marcus rode past on a borrowed horse. Their eyes met. Marcus saw something in that gaze that made his stomach go cold. Not defiance, not hatred, but simple acknowledgement. The balance of power had shifted. Marcus controlled Jake's legal status, but Jake controlled everything that mattered in the swamps. That night, Sitting in his father's study, Marcus made a decision. We need to sell him. I don't care what it costs. He's too dangerous to keep. Robert, who'd listened to the whole story, shook his head. He's also the most valuable piece of property on this plantation. He works hard, causes no trouble on the grounds, and you're telling me he's dangerous only if we chase him into territory where he has every advantage. Solution's simple. Stop chasing him. He's coordinating resistance out there. You heard Bell's concerns. Speculation. We have no proof. Robert poured whiskey into 2 glasses. Besides, larger events are overtaking these regional concerns. Have you been following the political situation? Lincoln's likely to win in November. If he does, South Carolina will secede. War's coming, Marcus. When it does, we'll have bigger problems than one clever slave. Marcus wanted to argue, but his father was right. The nation was fracturing. Personal grudges had to take secondary priority to survival. He drank his whiskey and said nothing more about Jake. But he didn't forget. And when war finally came, Marcus would have his chance for revenge. The hunt never happened again. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency on November 6, 1860. South Carolina seceded on December 20th. Mississippi followed on January 9, 1861. By April, the Confederacy had formed and fired on Fort Sumter. The war that had been building for decades finally erupted into open conflict. Warren County sent its young men to fight. Farmers' sons and planters' sons, overseers, forming militia companies that drilled in courthouse squares before marching off to Virginia. Marcus Thornton joined the 17th Mississippi Infantry as a lieutenant. His father stayed behind to manage the plantation, but with most able-bodied white men gone, management became increasingly difficult. The plantation's overseer, Cass, enlisted as well. The replacement overseer was an older man named Phelps, who lacked Cass's brutal efficiency. The war changed everything. Cotton prices collapsed as the Union blockaded southern ports. Food became scarce as the Confederacy redirected agricultural production to feed the army. The plantation system, which had always depended on overwhelming white violence to maintain control, began to crack under the pressure of reduced supervision. Enslaved people on plantations across Mississippi recognized the shifting power dynamic. Some ran, others simply worked more slowly, understanding that the resources to punish resistance were stretched thin. A few, like Jake, waited and prepared. Jake's role on the Thornton plantation had evolved during the first year of war. With Cass gone and Phelps ineffective, Jake had been given more responsibility, supervising work crews, managing equipment, organizing labor. Robert Thornton saw this as practical necessity. Jake saw it as an opportunity to build networks. He connected with enslaved people on neighboring plantations, creating a communication system that used trusted messengers who traveled under the guise of plantation business. Information flowed through this network. Which Confederate units were stationed where? Which patrol routes had been abandoned? Which white families were struggling? Jake filed every detail away, building a comprehensive map of the war's local impact. In the spring of 1862, reports began reaching Warren County about Union forces operating along the Mississippi River. General Ulysses Grant was pushing south, targeting Confederate supply lines. The Tennessee River fell, then the Cumberland. By April, Union gunboats were shelling Memphis. The war that had seemed distant was suddenly approaching Warren County's doorstep. Robert Thornton, reading reports in Vicksburg newspapers, grew increasingly anxious. If the Union takes the river, we're cut off from everything. He was right. By July of 1862, Union forces controlled most of the Mississippi River north of Vicksburg. The Confederacy held Vicksburg and the stretch south to Port Hudson, but that grip was tenuous. Union raids into Mississippi's interior became common. Cavalry sweeps searching for Confederate supplies, liberating slaves, disrupting transportation. The enslaved population heard these reports and understood. The army bringing emancipation was getting closer. Jake began preparing for the moment when opportunity would arrive. He identified supplies that could be cached. Food, tools, weapons stolen gradually from the plantation's depleted armory. He mapped routes that would allow rapid movement of groups, not just individuals. He identified which enslaved people on surrounding plantations would be willing to fight, not just flee. He built the infrastructure for organized resistance, not random escape. And he waited. The opportunity came in November of 1862. A Confederate supply depot operated near the Big Black River, 12 miles east of the Thornon plantation. The depot stored food, ammunition, and medical supplies destined for Confederate units fighting in Tennessee. It was guarded by a single company of militia, boys too young or men too old for frontline service. The depot's security relied more on isolation than strength. Who would attack a supply depot this far inside Confederate territory? Jake would, but not alone. He'd spent months recruiting carefully. 23 men and 7 women from 5 different plantations. All people he'd vetted personally, all willing to risk everything for the chance at meaningful resistance. They met in the swamps on November 7th, 1862, a cold night when most white families huddled inside by fires. Jake laid out the plan using a map drawn in the mud with a stick. The depot's here. 2 guards at the entrance, maybe 4 inside. We come at midnight when they're tired. We take the weapons first, rifles, pistols, anything we can carry. Then we take food and medical supplies. Then we burn what's left. A man named Thomas from the Bell plantation asked the obvious question. And after, where do we go? North, Jake said. We move through the swamps where patrols can't track us. We hit Confederate positions along the way, stores, supplies, anything that hurts them, and we keep moving until we reach Union lines. You think the Union will accept us? They need scouts who know the territory. They need people willing to fight. We offer both. They'll take us. Jake met each person's eyes. But understand, once we do this, there's no going back. We're insurgents. The Confederacy will hunt us. Some of us won't survive. Anyone want to leave? Leave now. No one left. The raid happened at midnight on November 8th. The group moved silently through the darkness, approaching the depot from the riverside where guards were least vigilant. Jake went first, climbing the low fence, moving across open ground to the main building. 2 guards sat by a fire, talking quietly. Jake circled behind them. What happened next was swift and silent. No shots fired, no alarm raised. Within 5 minutes, the guards were bound and gagged, and the raiders were inside the depot. They found 12 rifles, ammunition, 3 revolvers, barrels of salt pork, sacks of cornmeal, and medical supplies. They took everything they could carry, loading it onto a commandeered wagon. Then they set fire to what remained. Cotton bales, wooden crates, the building itself. By the time Confederate militia from Vicksburg arrived at dawn, the depot was ashes and the raiders were gone, vanished into the swamps with enough supplies to sustain a guerrilla campaign for months. The raid sent shock waves through Warren County. A coordinated attack on a Confederate supply depot by enslaved people was unprecedented. The local newspaper called it the work of outside agitators. Confederate officials blamed Union spies. But Robert Thornton, reading the reports, remembered his son's warnings about Jake. He went to the quarters that morning and found Jake's cabin empty. Jake was gone, along with 5 others from the Thornon plantation. Robert stood in the empty cabin, staring at the bare walls, understanding finally that Marcus had been right all along. The legend of Black Mamba had just become a military problem. Between November of 1862 and May of 1863, Jake's group conducted 17 operations against Confederate targets in western Mississippi. They burned supply wagons, cut telegraph lines, ambushed small patrols, and freed enslaved people from plantations whose owners had fled or been conscripted. Each operation was carefully planned, meticulously executed, and left no survivors to identify the attackers. The Confederate response was predictable but ineffective. Increased patrols that couldn't navigate the swamps, bounties that no one could collect, rhetoric that blamed Northern interference rather than acknowledging organized local resistance. The group grew. Freed slaves joined willingly, bringing local knowledge and skills. By March of 1863, Jake commanded roughly 60 people operating from camps hidden deep in the swamp. They developed a reputation that rivaled Jake's personal legend. Confederate soldiers spoke nervously about the swamp devils. Guerrillas who appeared from nowhere struck hard and vanished before response could be organized. The enslaved population spoke of Black Mamba's army, freedom fighters who proved that resistance was possible. But success brought attention. In April of 1863, the Confederate Army assigned a full company of experienced troops to pacify the Yazoo Basin region. These weren't militia boys or tired patrol guards. These were veterans from Shiloh and Corinth, men who'd seen real combat and knew how to fight irregulars. They brought tracker dogs, experienced scouts, and a ruthless commander named Captain William Strother, who'd made his reputation hunting bushwhackers in Missouri. Strother announced his arrival with a proclamation posted in every Warren County town. Any Negro found in possession of weapons will be executed immediately. Any white person providing aid to insurgents will be tried for treason. The lawlessness in this region ends now. Jake read the proclamation when one of his scouts brought it from Vicksburg. He understood what it meant. The game had changed. The Confederacy was taking him seriously enough to commit real resources. He needed to adapt. The adaptation came in two parts. First, Jake dispersed his forces, breaking the 60-person group into 6 smaller units that operated independently. This made them harder to track and reduced the risk of losing everyone in a single engagement. Second, he shifted strategy from harassment to intelligence gathering. Instead of attacking Confederate positions, his people began mapping them, documenting troop strengths, supply routes, and defensive weaknesses. This intelligence would be valuable to Union forces when they finally arrived in strength. That arrival happened sooner than expected. In May of 1863, General Grant launched his campaign to capture Vicksburg. Union forces pushed inland from the Mississippi River, cutting off the city from Confederate reinforcements. Battles erupted across Warren County, Champion Hill, Big Black River Bridge. Desperate fights that left hundreds dead and shattered the Confederate defensive line. Jake's groups, operating in the chaos, passed intelligence directly to Union scouts. Locations of Confederate artillery, supply dumps, headquarters positions. The information proved devastatingly accurate. After one particularly valuable intelligence delivery, a Union major named Samuel Clark asked to meet Jake personally. They met in a clearing near the Big Black River, with Union pickets providing security. Clark studied Jake carefully. "I've heard stories about you. Black Mamba, they call you. Some of my men think you're a myth."
"I'm real enough,"
Jake said. "I can see that. Question is, what do you want? Besides killing Confederates, which you've been doing effectively. I want to keep my people alive until this war ends. I want the Union to win, and I want the men who owned us to pay for what they did." The Clark nodded. "The first two I can help with. The third is more complicated. But I can offer you official status as a Union scout. You'd report to me, provide intelligence and tactical support, and in exchange, you'd have the Army's protection. Your people, too. Jake considered this. Official status meant visibility, which carried risks, but it also meant resources, legitimacy, and protection under military authority. What happens after the war? Honestly, I don't know, but I know that Lincoln's going to issue an Emancipation Proclamation soon. Slavery ends one way or another. Better to be on the winning side when it does. Jake extended his hand. Clark shook it. The swamp insurgency had just become an official Union operation. Vicksburg fell on July 4, 1863, after a 47-day siege that starved the city into submission. The Confederate garrison surrendered, giving the Union complete control of the Mississippi River and cutting the Confederacy in half. Jake's intelligence had contributed to that victory. His scouts provided information about Confederate supply routes and defensive weak points that Grant's staff used to plan their attacks. After the surrender, Jake and his corps group were officially mustered as Union scouts attached to the 15th Corps. They wore Union blue, carried military-issue rifles, and operated with the full backing of federal authority. The role gave Jake access to Confederate prisoner records. He searched methodically through rosters, looking for specific names. He found Marcus Thornton in a prison camp outside Vicksburg, captured during the siege, held with 3,000 other Confederate soldiers awaiting parole or exchange. Jake requested permission to interview prisoners about conditions on Mississippi plantations. The request was approved. He brought Marcus Thornton out of the camp on a Tuesday morning in late July. They sat across from each other at a rough wooden table in an empty warehouse. Marcus looked thinner, tired, but his eyes still carried the arrogance Jake remembered. So the runner became a soldier. Marcus said, "I always knew you were dangerous." "You made me dangerous," Jake replied. "Your hunts taught me everything I needed. You trained me better than you knew." Marcus laughed bitterly. "And now you're here to gloat." "No. I'm here to make sure you understand something. Everything your family built was built on stealing people's lives. My life, the lives of everyone who worked your fields. You thought you could do that forever without consequence. You were wrong. You want revenge. Go ahead, kill me. Won't change anything. The South will rise again after this war ends." Jake shook his head. "I'm not going to kill you. The Union will parole you eventually. Send you home to a plantation that doesn't exist anymore. Your father's dead. Died during the siege when a Union shell hit your house. Your property's been confiscated. Everything you owned is gone. You'll spend the rest of your life poor, powerless, knowing that the man you hunted for sport is the reason you lost everything. That's my revenge." Marcus stared at him, understanding finally settling in. "You planned this? All of it?" "No, I survived. I adapted. I waited. And when opportunity came, I took it." Jake stood. "I don't need to kill you, Marcus. History already did." When Jake walked out of the warehouse, he never saw Marcus Thornton again. Records indicate Marcus was paroled in 1864, returned to Warren County, and died in 1868 from illness. The Thornton plantation was divided among freedmen during Reconstruction. Jake served as a Union scout until the war ended in April of 1865. He participated in Sherman's Meridian Campaign, provided intelligence during operations across Mississippi and Alabama, and trained other former slaves in reconnaissance and guerrilla tactics. His reputation grew throughout the Union Army. Black Mamba wasn't a myth or a ghost story anymore, but a flesh and blood soldier whose skills had proven decisive in multiple engagements. Union officers respected him. Confederate survivors feared him. The enslaved people who heard his story saw proof that resistance was possible. After the war ended, Jake faced a choice. He could stay in the army. The Union was recruiting Buffalo soldiers, black regiments that would serve in the Western territories. Or he could settle, claim land, build something permanent. He chose to settle. Under the Homestead Act and special provisions for freedmen, he claimed 60 acres in Warren County, land that had once been part of the Thornton plantation. He built a house, planted crops, and married Esther, the woman who'd helped him survive those early years. They had 4 children. But the settlement wasn't peaceful. Reconstruction brought its own conflicts. White Southerners, bitter about defeat, formed organizations dedicated to restoring white supremacy through terror. The Ku Klux Klan operated openly in parts of Mississippi, burning homes, murdering freedmen, intimidating voters. Jake's reputation made him a target. Klansmen came to his property twice in 1867. Both times they retreated after encountering carefully placed defenses and evidence that Jake hadn't forgotten his swamp skills. Word spread. Black Mamba's land was off limits unless you wanted to end up face down in black water. Jake lived on that land for 38 years. He raised his children, taught them to read and write, and told them stories about Africa, the parts he still remembered after decades in America. He taught them tracking, survival, self-defense. He never told them everything he'd done during the war. Some things were better left as legend. He died in 1903, 71 years old, surrounded by family. His obituary in the Vicksburg newspaper was brief: Jacob Thornton. He'd taken his former owner's surname, a common practice among freedmen. Died Tuesday at his home. Veteran of the Union Army, survived by wife and 4 children. The obituary didn't mention Black Mamba. It didn't mention the hunts, the resistance, the fear he'd inspired across Warren County. Those stories lived in oral tradition, passed down through generations of black families who remembered when one man stood up against an entire system and won. The land Jake claimed in Warren County is still owned by his descendants. The original house burned in 1947, but the foundation remains. Stone and timber that's weathered a century of Mississippi floods and storms. Local historians know the property's history. Some of them have tried to document Jake's story, tracking down military records, pension applications, and scattered references in Union Army reports. What they found confirms the outline. An enslaved man named Jake served as a scout, participated in major campaigns, and settled as a freedman after the war. But the details, the 19 hunts, the patrol dogs, the swamp resistance, those exist only in oral tradition, and Confederate reports too embarrassed to acknowledge how much damage one man inflicted. The legend persists because it matters. It's proof that the enslaved population didn't wait passively for freedom. They fought for it using every tool available: silence, strategy, violence when necessary. They turned the landscape itself into a weapon. They learned their enemies' weaknesses and exploited them ruthlessly. And sometimes, when circumstances aligned, they won. On humid summer nights in Warren County, when fog rolls off the Big Black River and visibility drops to almost nothing, locals still tell stories about something moving through the swamps. Most dismiss it as folklore, the kind of ghost story every region develops over time. But the descendants of enslaved people who worked those plantations know better. They know that Black Mamba was real. They know what he represented. And they know that some legends survive because they carry truth too important to forget.